They say an omega's worth is measured in her submission. That the sweetest thing a woman without power can offer the world is her silence, her smallness, her willingness to disappear into the spaces powerful men leave behind. Elara had been disappearing for 7 years. Not into shadow, not into death. Into the forbidden gardens of the dragon's fortress, behind locked gates of black iron and ancient warning, where General Khan kept his greatest secret the way a collector keeps a thing too dangerous to display hidden, preserved, and owned. She was a myth, a ghost story whispered between servants who had caught a single glimpse through a cracked door. The Omega, they breathed, the general's prize, no name given, no face confirmed. Only the rumor of extraordinary beauty and the certainty absolute, bone deep, that she was not for looking at, not for speaking of, not for saving. She had learned not to hope. Hope, in the dragon's fortress, was the cruelest form of cruelty. It asked you to imagine a world beyond the garden walls, and then it let you live long enough to know you would never reach them. It was a cold morning in the 7th year when 3 kings came to the summit that would decide the fate of the realms. Elara watched them from behind the garden's iron gate, as she always watched the world quietly, hungrily, from a place she was not supposed to be. She did not know their names yet. She did not know that all 3 of them, in the same heartbeat, at the same iron gate, had caught sight of her and felt something ancient and impossible ignite in their chests. She did not know that by nightfall, the 3 most powerful kings alive would sit in closed chambers and argue not over borders, not over blood, not over gold, but over how to set her free. She did not know yet what she truly was. But the blight, rising in the dark beneath the kingdoms, already did. There were things in this world that were not meant to be seen. Not because they were ugly, but because they were too rare, too fragile, too easily consumed by the hunger of powerful men who had never learned the difference between possessing a thing and protecting it. General Khan understood this. It was, perhaps, the only tender instinct left in a man built entirely from iron and conquest. He had not locked the gates of the forbidden garden to punish the woman inside. He had locked them, he told himself in the cold hours before dawn, because the world was not worthy of her. Elara had stopped believing that 7 years ago. She moved through the garden the way water moves through stone, not with force, but with quiet, patient insistence. The roses had grown tall enough to reach her shoulder. The moon-petal vines had climbed the east wall and begun their slow, silver descent down the other side, reaching, always reaching, toward whatever lay beyond. She understood them. She did not prune them back. She was 23 years old. She had been brought to the fortress at 16, before she understood what she was, before anyone understood what she was, including the man who had taken her. The annual peacekeeping summit would begin at dawn. She had heard the servants talking through the locked gate. 3 kings were coming. She had pressed her palm flat against the iron and felt, for the first time in years, something stir in the earth beneath her feet. Not hope. She was too careful for hope. Something older than hope. Something that felt like a door she had forgotten existed, shifting, slowly, on its hinges.
Chapter 1.
The dragon's fortress had been built to humble men. Every corridor was deliberately wider than necessary, every ceiling vaulted high enough to make even the tallest general feel diminutive. General Khan, who was neither tall nor physically imposing by the standards of the realms, had designed it this way with precise psychological intent. Men who felt small negotiated badly. Men who felt observed negotiated worse, and every room in the fortress had been built to make its visitors feel both. The 3 kings arrived at separate hours, as protocol dictated. The Lycan King came first, as he always did early, deliberately, because arriving first was itself a form of dominance. His name was Kalen, though few said it to his face. He was broad in the way of mountains, not aggressive but immovable. His dark hair threaded at the temples with the silver that came early to Lycan royalty, the mark of a king who had shifted too many times in battle to emerge entirely unchanged. He moved through the fortress corridors with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed a room to fall silent when he entered it simply did. His beta walked 2 steps behind him, carrying nothing. Kalen carried nothing either. He had learned, long ago, that the most dangerous men arrive empty-handed. The Vampire King came at noon theatrically, precisely at the moment when the sun was highest and most punishing. Because arriving when the sun burned hottest was its own kind of statement from a man whose people were rumored to wither beneath it. His name was Dorian, and the rumors about the sun were lies he had carefully cultivated. He was lean where Kalen was broad, his features assembled with the architectural precision of something made rather than born. He had eyes the color of deep water, not blue, not gray, but the particular shade that exists only at the bottom of things. He wore no crown. He never did. The crown, he had once remarked in a court that went dead silent, was a target. He preferred to let men wonder whether he was wearing it. The Alpha King arrived at dusk. His name was Rylan, and he was the reason the other two had agreed to come at all. The Alpha King held no single territory. He held the allegiance of 17 packs across 4 continents, which made him the most politically dangerous man in any room and the most personally exhausting. He was the sort of man who made decisions quickly and lived with them slowly, and it showed in the set of his jaw, in the faint line between his brows that never fully relaxed. He had copper-brown skin and eyes, the color of amber held up to firelight, and he carried the perpetual scent of pine and cold mountain air as though the land itself followed him. Khan received all 3 in the great hall, served them wine they only pretended to drink, and delivered the opening address of the summit in the clipped, efficient manner of a man who believed every word spoken beyond its necessary minimum was a word wasted. The summit concerned borders. It always concerned borders. 4 territories had been bleeding into each other for a generation: the Lycan Highlands, the Vampire Lowlands, the Alpha Coalition's Eastern Corridor, and Khan's own Dragon Territory sitting at the center like a stone dropped in still water. Every 5 years, the 4 powers met here to renegotiate, to remind each other of their mutual necessity, and to leave with agreements that would hold for exactly as long as it was inconvenient to break them. It was, by every measurable standard, a routine summit. And then the Lycan King took the wrong corridor on the way back to his chambers. Kalen had not meant to find the garden. He had been looking for the eastern stairwell. Misled by a servant's directions that were either incompetent or deliberate, he had not yet decided which, and had turned left instead of right, past the Hall of Banners, and found himself at the end of a narrow passage, facing a gate of black iron. The gate was old, older than the fortress. He thought the iron had the particular oxidized darkness of metal that had been in one place long enough to become part of the place itself. There were no guards. There was no lock he could see, though he was certain the lock existed. And beyond the bars, in the silver wash of early evening, there was a garden so densely alive it seemed impossible that anything grew here at all, in this fortress of stone and strategy. And there was a woman. She stood with her back to the gate, her face lifted toward the darkening sky, and Kalen felt the Alpha pull hit him like a wall. It was not metaphor, it was not infatuation. The Alpha pull was a physiological event, a full-body recognition, ancient and ungovernable, that the Lycan people had documented since before written language existed. It happened when a Lycan of significant power encountered their fated mate. It felt, those who had survived it reported, like the ground beneath you deciding to become the sky. Kalen grabbed the iron gate with both hands. She turned slowly, as though she had learned long ago that sudden movements cost you, and he saw her face for the first time. She was not merely beautiful. Beauty was a word that applied to things that were finished, composed, arranged for viewing. She was something rawer than that. Something that suggested that beauty, as a concept, had been an approximation all along, a rough draft for whatever this was. Her eyes found his through the gate. They were dark and still and measuring, and they held no surprise, as though she had been expecting someone to stand at this gate eventually, as though she had simply been waiting to see who it would be. "You have the wrong corridor," she said. Her voice was low and unhurried. "Yes," he said. He did not move. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, he counted, then turned back to her roses. Not dismissively, not shyly, with the particular composure of someone who has learned to ration their attention very carefully. Kalen stood at the gate for another 4 minutes before he made himself walk away. He did not find the eastern stairwell. He found instead the Vampire King standing at the turn in the passage, looking back toward the garden gate with an expression Kalen had never seen on Dorian's face before. Something unguarded, something almost young. "You felt it," Kalen said. "It was not a question." Dorian turned to look at him. A long pause, the kind Dorian used the way other men used weapons. Then, "The garden is forbidden." "Yes." "Khans." "Apparently." Another silence. Then Dorian said, very quietly, "That is not a woman who belongs to anyone." They stood in the corridor as the fortress darkened around them, and neither of them spoke about what they had both felt. The pull, the recognition, the particular devastation of finding something that was yours and being separated from it by a gate you had not been invited to open. The Alpha King found them there 20 minutes later, coming from the opposite direction, which meant he had also taken a wrong corridor, and also found the garden, and also stood at that gate and felt what they had felt. Rylan looked at both of them. His jaw was tight, his amber eyes were darker than usual. "We have a problem," he said. "We have the same problem," Dorian said. Kaelin said nothing, but he turned to look back down the passage toward the distant iron gate, and the muscle in his jaw moved once, slowly, like something settling into a decision it would not reverse. That night, the Blight crossed the northern border of the Lycan Highlands. It left no bodies, it left no fire, it left only silence, 3 villages whose inhabitants had simply stopped, not fled, not died, in any manner the scouts could identify. Simply ceased, like candles snuffed by a hand no one saw. The report reached Kaelin's chambers at midnight. He read it standing up, his Lycan senses reaching outward instinctively toward the south, toward the fortress, toward the garden. The Blight had been moving for 2 years now, slowly, quietly, taking the edges of things first border villages, isolated outposts, the outermost rings of civilization. No one had connected the incidents yet. No one had drawn the line between the points on the map and looked at where it was heading. Kaelin drew it now. He crossed to his desk and spread the regional maps with hands that were entirely steady, because steadiness was something he had trained into himself so completely it operated independently of what he felt. He marked the known Blight incidents with his thumbnail, pressing small crescents into the parchment. The line, when he stepped back and looked at it, pointed here. To this fortress. To the center of the realms. To the garden behind the iron gate. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he folded the map, placed it inside his jacket against his chest, and went to find the other 2 kings.
Chapter 2.
Khan received them at dawn in the war room, not the formal reception hall, which was for summits, but the war room, which was for truths, and Kaelin understood immediately that this had been deliberate. Khan had known they would come. He had likely known since the moment he heard 3 sets of footsteps pause in the corridor outside his forbidden garden. He was already seated when they arrived. A pot of black tea sat on the table before him, untouched. He did not offer them chairs. "Sit," Kaelin said, to Dorian and Rylan, ignoring the power play entirely and pulling out 3 chairs with the calm efficiency of a man rearranging furniture. Khan watched this, and something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite amusement, but its distant cousin. "You saw her," Khan said. No preamble, no courtesy architecture. "We saw her," Rylan said. "And you felt the bond." A silence in which all 3 kings refrained from confirming something that did not require confirmation. Khan lifted his tea, looked at it, set it down again without drinking. "I acquired Elara 7 years ago. She was 16. I did not know at the time what she was. I knew only that she was an omega of unusual quality, and that in a world where men of power take what they want, I preferred to take her first and ensure she was undamaged." "That is a remarkable euphemism for captivity," Dorian said. "It is a remarkable world for a soulbinder to survive in," Khan replied, and the room went very still. Rylan leaned forward. "Say that again." Khan looked at him with the patient expression of a man who has held a secret so long it has stopped feeling like a secret, and started feeling like a burden. "She is a soulbinder, the last one. Perhaps the last one that will ever exist. The lineage requires conditions so rare that the scholars who study such things have declared it effectively extinct." A pause. They were wrong. The 3 kings processed this in their separate ways. Kaelin went still in the manner of Lycans under threat, not frozen but concentrated, every sense reorientating. Dorian's already composed face became something beyond composed, a blankness so complete it was its own kind of communication. Rylan pressed his knuckles against the table once, lightly, and then was very controlled. A soulbinder was not merely a rare omega. A soulbinder was a being whose life force was threaded through the land itself, the territories, the ley lines, the ancient blood compact between the species and the earth they lived on. They were, in the oldest texts, described as the living hinge of the world. When they were well, the land was well. When they suffered, the land suffered in corresponding measure. "The Blight," Kaelin said, "has been accelerating for 7 years," Khan confirmed quietly, "since I locked her in that garden." The silence that followed was not comfortable. "You knew," Rylan said. "You knew what the isolation was doing." "I suspected. I confirmed it approximately 3 years ago." Khan met the Alpha King's amber eyes without flinching. "I have been searching for a solution that did not involve releasing her into a world that would immediately attempt to weaponize or destroy her. I have not found one. A beat. Until now." He looked at all three of them with the direct, cold clarity of a strategist who has just played the card he has been holding for years. You are her fated mates. All three of you an unprecedented convergence that the old texts called a triad bond. It has not occurred in recorded history. It may not have been possible until he paused. A soulbinder bonded to a triad is protected. Not merely by the strength of her mates, but by the metaphysical architecture of the bond itself. It anchors her life force, stabilizes the land link, and creates a barrier the blight cannot cross. You want to give her to us? Dorian said. The word give landed with faint distaste. I want to negotiate her freedom, Khan said, with equal precision. In exchange for territorial concessions I have identified as mutually beneficial, I have prepared documents. He slid 3 folders across the table, one to each king. They were thick. He had prepared them recently. The ink was barely dry on the binding thread. She is not a prize, Khan said, as they opened their folders. His voice had shifted something harder beneath it now, something that was not strategy, but was close to what strategy protects when it is guarding something genuine. She is not property. She does not know the full nature of what she is, and you will not inform her as a transaction. She has spent 7 years being managed by a powerful man for reasons she was never given. If you approach her the way I did with ownership and good intentions, you will lose her in a way that cannot be recovered. Rylan looked up from the folder. What does she know about us? Nothing. She knows 3 kings came for the summit. She does not know you saw her. She does not know about the triad bond. A pause. She knows about the blight. She has felt it pulling at her for years. She describes it as something eating at the edge of her sleep. She's been feeling it and no one told her why, Kaelin said. No. The Lycan King closed his folder, looked at it, then looked at Khan with an expression that communicated, with complete economy, exactly what he thought of that decision. Khan accepted the look without argument. It was, evidently, the one accusation he had no defense for. What are the terms? Rylan asked. And the negotiation began. It took 6 hours. Khan was a precise and merciless negotiator. Kaelin had expected nothing less, but the 3 kings had the advantage of wanting the same outcome, which meant their coalition, improvised and unprecedented, held. Khan took the eastern corridor from the Alpha territory. He took 3 highland passes from the Lycan north. He took the Shadowfen trading rights from the Vampire lowlands. In exchange, Elara would be moved to the High Castle neutral territory, jointly administered under the protection and care of all 3 kings, with full autonomy over her own movements and decisions. Full autonomy, Dorian repeated, when the word was written. Full autonomy, Khan confirmed. She has had none. She will need to learn that it is real before she will trust it. This will take time. Do not rush it. You speak as though you know her well, Rylan observed. I have watched over her for 7 years, Khan said. I have not spoken to her casually in 4. We reached an arrangement. She stopped asking to leave, and I stopped pretending the asking was unreasonable. He looked at the window. She is not broken. I want to be clear about this. She is not what you would expect of a woman who has been kept. She is, he paused, looking for a word and finding only the truth of it, intact. Everything they should have damaged, they didn't. I don't know how. She protected it, Kaelin said. Khan looked at him. She protected whatever was hers, Kaelin said. That's what people do when everything external is taken. They go inward and they guard it there. You're surprised she's intact because you were looking at what you'd taken. You weren't watching what she was keeping. A long silence. Then Khan said, very quietly, No, I suppose I wasn't. They told her that evening. Khan unlocked the garden gate himself, Elara noted this. He had not done it in years and led the 3 kings through the moon petal vines to the stone bench at the garden center, where she sat with a book she had already read 4 times. She looked at all 4 of them, and her expression did not change. You're leaving, Khan said. To the High Castle. These are the kings who will. He stopped. Recalibrated. You will be under their protection. You will have full freedom of movement. You will have access to scholars, to healers, to any resource you name. Elara looked at the 3 kings in sequence. The broad Lycan with the mountain silver in his hair. The composed vampire with the deep water eyes. The Alpha King whose jaw was tight and whose amber gaze kept coming back to her face as though it was doing so against his own instructions. Why? She asked. It was, evidently, not the question any of them had prepared for. Rylan opened his mouth. Dorian said nothing, which was his version of the same thing. Kaelin said, Because you should have left 7 years ago. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her book, marked her page with the dried stem of a moon petal vine, and stood up. "When do we leave?" she said. "Tomorrow," Khan said. She nodded once. Then she looked at him, only him, and something passed between them that the three kings did not have the context to read. Not warmth, exactly. Not forgiveness. Something more complicated than either. "I know you believed it was protection," she said. Khan said nothing. "I know," she said again, softer. And then she walked back toward the fortress, past all three kings without looking at any of them, carrying her book and her 7 years of silence like something she had decided, finally, to set down somewhere else. That night, the blight moved again. This time it crossed into dragon territory, not the edges, not the borderlands, but the interior. A forest, 40 miles from the fortress. The scouts reported the same silence, the same erasure. 40 miles in a single night. It had never moved that fast. Kalen stood at his chamber window and looked south and felt, through the mate bond that was already humming in his chest like a second heartbeat, that she felt it too, that somewhere in the garden behind the iron gate, Elara was awake and pressing her palm against the earth and feeling the blight pull at the thread that connected her to the land. He wanted to go to her. He did not. He had 7 years of her captivity to account for before he had earned that. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow they would take her somewhere safe, and they would begin.
Chapter 3.
The high castle sat at the exact geographical center of the 4 territories, a neutrality so deliberately engineered it was almost aggressive. It had been built 3 centuries ago by a council that no longer existed, for a peace that had not lasted, and it had been empty for 80 years. The stonework was flawless, the corridors were cold. The gardens, 3 of them, on the eastern, western, and northern faces, had gone wild in the absence of tending, and were now less gardens than territories of their own, dense with unpruned growth and the kind of stubborn beauty that required no permission. Elara walked through the front gates and stopped. She stood in the central courtyard and turned slowly, taking inventory the way she took inventory of everything quietly, methodically, without letting anyone see how much it mattered. The sky above the inner walls was enormous, unobstructed, the kind of sky that required space you couldn't get inside a fortress garden. She had not seen a sky that size in 7 years. "The eastern suite is prepared for you," Rylan said, coming up beside her. "But the rooms are yours to choose, any room that isn't currently occupied." "How many rooms?" 47 livable ones, more if you want to restore some of the sealed wings. She looked at him sideways. 47. "You don't have to use more than one." "I know that," she said, and then, after a pause, "I haven't chosen a room in 7 years. I may need a day." It was the closest thing to vulnerability she had offered any of them. Rylan received it with the care it deserved, which was to say he did not treat it as vulnerability at all. "Take the week," he said. "We're not going anywhere." She chose the tower room on the 5th day. It was the least logical choice. 4 flights of stairs, no direct access to the castle's main corridors, a single window that faced north toward the Lycan Highlands, and it was, everyone understood without saying, exactly the right choice for someone learning to trust that a door she could open was not the same as a door that would close on her. She moved into it with nothing. She had arrived with nothing Khan had offered. She had declined everything except the clothes she was wearing and the book with the dried moon petal stem marking her page. Kalen left a blanket outside her door on the first night, folded, with no note. Dorian left a lamp on the second night, the good kind, with clean oil. Rylan, on the 3rd night, left a second book. He had chosen it by walking the castle's small library for 2 hours, pulling volumes and replacing them, a process his beta had observed in respectful silence before wisely leaving the room. Elara took all 3 things inside and said nothing about them. But on the 4th morning, she came down to breakfast before they had come to find her, and she sat at the table and poured her own tea. And when Rylan entered the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, she looked up at him and said, "The book was the right choice." He sat down across from her. "Which one did you get?" "Ancient Bonds and the Architecture of the Triad." A silence in which Rylan very carefully did not look as though he had left that book on purpose. Elara wrapped both hands around her tea. "I knew before you left it. Khan had books he didn't restrict what I read, just where I went. I read about soulbinders when I was 18. A pause. I read about the Triad bond when I was 20. She looked up at him. "I have known for 3 years what I am, and what the 3 of you are to me. I would have appreciated," she said with a quietness that was not gentleness, "being consulted rather than collected." The Alpha King held her gaze. His jaw was tight. "You're right," he said. We handled it wrong. Khan handled it wrong. You inherited his method. We should have asked you first. Yes. I'm asking now, he said. Do you want to be here? She looked at her tea. Outside the kitchen window, one of the wild gardens moved in the morning wind, a ripple of unpruned green going silver at the edges in the early light. I want to be somewhere I chose, she said finally. I'm trying to determine whether this counts. Rylan said, let us know when you decide. And he poured himself tea and sat with her in silence, and did not push, and did not perform patience, and simply was there, which was, she would think later, the first genuinely trustworthy thing any powerful man had done in her presence in 7 years. The blight did not wait for her to feel safe. It came for the Western Territory 3 weeks into their residence at the High Castle, not border villages this time, but a river. The Aldenmere, the central waterway that fed the agricultural land of the Alpha Coalition's breadbasket territories, it simply stopped. Not drought, the water was present. But it ran silent and black for 6 miles, and everything that drank from it stood very still and did not move again. They gathered in the castle's war room, a room Elara walked into without being invited, and none of them told her to leave. She stood at the map table and looked at the incident markers Kaelin had placed. His system was the same as the one she had developed in her head, lying awake in the garden, feeling the pulls and the silences and trying to make geography out of sensation. You've been tracking it, she said. Since the summit, he said. She reached out and moved one of his markers 3 inches south. There was an incident here, 4 years ago, a shepherd settlement. It was attributed to illness. Kaelin looked at the marker's new position, then at her. It wasn't illness, she said. I felt it go. She began to mark, from memory, every blight incident she had felt over 7 years. Her hand was steady. The room was very quiet. When she finished, she stepped back, and the map told a story that none of them had had the data to read before. The blight had been circling her for years, not approaching, circling, the way a predator circles something it intends to take when the moment is right. It knows where I am, she said. It has always known. It was waiting until I was isolated enough that claiming me would be easy. She looked at the kings. Khan's protection was never sufficient, not because he lacked power, but because he was one. Whatever this thing is, it requires more than one power source to hold it back. The Triad bond, Dorian said. The Triad bond, she confirmed. And then, after a pause that she used, the way she used all pauses deliberately, holding the weight of a thing before releasing it, I am not afraid of it. I have been afraid of it for 7 years, and I have decided I am finished with that. She looked at all 3 of them with eyes that were dark and steady and entirely, formidably her own. So, what do we do first?
Chapter 4.
Trust, Elara had concluded long ago, was not a feeling. It was a practice, a series of small, deliberate choices to extend yourself toward someone and wait to see what they did with the extension. She had practiced it, carefully and sparingly, over the weeks that followed. With Kaelin, it had begun at the map table and continued in the evenings when he ran the castle's perimeter, a Lycan habit, boundary marking, automatic as breathing, and she began, quietly, to join him, not every night, not because he asked, but because walking the edges of a place you were allowed to leave felt different from walking the edges of a place you weren't, and she wanted to practice feeling the difference in her body until her body believed it. He did not talk much on these walks, neither did she. This was its own form of respect. With Dorian, it had begun differently in the library, where he spent his mornings with a precision that suggested deep familiarity with the particular comfort of having nowhere to be but inside a book. She had found him there on her 2nd week, working through the castle's collection of pre-fracture historical texts with an expression of concentrated interest he did not seem to know was visible. You're looking for records of soulbinders, she said, from the doorway. He looked up. Previous ones, yes. I already found them, 3 years ago. She walked to the shelf behind him, pulled a slim, almost colorless volume from between 2 larger books where it had been deliberately obscured, not missing, not lost, but hidden by someone who had wanted it not to be found, and placed it on the table before him. Dorian looked at the book, then at her. How long have you known where that was? Since I catalogued the library in my head during the 1st week, she said. I do that with rooms. She sat down across from him. I do it with people, too. I know you catalogued me in the first 20 minutes, and I know the assessment has been revising ever since. I don't mind. I do the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what is your current assessment of me? She considered this with the honesty she applied to everything. controlled to a degree that suggests you've been very badly surprised at least once, and have spent centuries ensuring it never happens again. Genuinely intelligent rather than performed intelligence, which is rarer than you'd think in powerful men. You use stillness as a weapon, but you also use it as shelter, and sometimes I can't tell which one is happening, and I suspect you prefer it that way. A long silence. That is, Dorian said carefully, an unusually accurate assessment. I've had 7 years to practice reading men I wasn't allowed to speak to, she said. She opened the slim volume to its first page. Shall we read? They read until midday. It was, Elara thought, the closest thing to companionship she had felt in years. With Rylan it was harder, which was its own kind of information. The Alpha King was not cold, none of them were cold, not in the way she had expected men of their power to be. But Rylan carried something she recognized because she carried it too. The particular weight of a person who has been responsible for too many other people for too long, and has forgotten how to be responsible only for themselves. She recognized it because it looked exactly like what she saw in the mirror. You run 17 packs, she said one evening, when they had been at the castle for 5 weeks and the blight had taken 2 more rivers, and the war room had become the place they all spent most of their evenings. 17, he confirmed, not looking up from the reports on the table. Do any of them know what's happening? They know the rivers, they don't know why. He set the reports down. I haven't told them about the blight as a unified phenomenon. If I do, there will be panic, and panic will fracture the coalition before we have a solution to offer. And if the blight takes another river before you have a solution, then I manage the fracture. He said it simply, without self-pity, in the tone of someone who has accepted that managing impossible things is the job, and complaining about the job is a luxury he can't afford. Elara looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the report he had set down and began to read it. He watched her do this. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said, without looking up. Knowing I don't have to is what makes doing it meaningful. He was quiet after that. But something in his shoulders, that perpetual set of a man carrying a weight he won't ask for help with, shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something slightly less than what it had been. The first attempt came on a Thursday. She was in the northern garden, the wildest of the 3, the one she had claimed first and was restoring slowly, not to order but to intention when the ground beneath her feet went cold. Not the cold of earth in morning, something else. Something that reached up through the soil and stone and touched the thread of her the way the blight had always touched it, that particular pull, that particular hunger, but closer now. Much closer than it had been. She stood very still. The blight didn't have a shape, exactly. It had a presence the way a room has a presence before the person in it speaks. She had been feeling it at the edge of her awareness for 7 years, learning its texture the way you learn the texture of a recurring nightmare. She knew its moods, its rhythms, its tells. This was not its usual circling patience. This was intent. Elara. Kaelin's voice, from the garden gate. She didn't turn, but she felt him cross the garden toward her in 3 seconds flat Lycan speed, which he used so rarely it was its own form of alarm signal. He stopped beside her. His hand found the space at the small of her back, not grasping, not pulling, just present. A warm anchor, and she felt the mate bond flare between them like a coal breathed back to life. The cold in the ground retreated. Not far, not gone, but back. It tested the bond, she said. Yes, his voice was very controlled. I felt it from the east wing. What does it feel like from your side? She considered this honestly. Like it underestimated something, she said. It didn't expect the bond to be that strong this early. Neither did I, he said, with a quietness that was not about the blight at all. She turned to look at him. They were very close, closer than they had been in any deliberate way, in any private space, with any acknowledged awareness of what they were to each other. His silver-threaded hair was dark with the morning mist. He was looking at her with an expression she had catalogued weeks ago and not been able to fully translate, something that was want and restraint, and a patience so disciplined it had become its own kind of tenderness. The bond needs to be completed, she said, factually, clinically, with the tone of a woman who will not allow herself to be fragile about a thing she has already decided about. When you're ready, he said, with the tone of a man who means it absolutely. I'm working on ready, she said. Take all the time there is, he said. She nodded once. Then she turned back to her garden, her hand finding the cold earth, feeling the blight's retreat still prickling at the edge of her awareness like a promise. Kaelin stayed. He did not leave until the morning mist burned away and the sky went blue and wide above the castle walls, and she had not asked him to, and he had not waited for permission. It was, she thought, becoming a pattern with these three men. They stayed. Not in the way Khan had stayed, owning the space, defining the walls. They stayed in the doorway way, the edge of the room way, available without assumption, present without pressure. She was beginning, very carefully, to believe that this was what it was supposed to feel like.
Chapter 5.
The blight struck the high castle on the 40th night. It came without the circling patience it had used before, no slow approach, no testing, no polite geography of warning. It came in a single movement, like a hand closing, and Elara felt it happen from the inside, the thread that connected her to the land going taut and then screaming. A sensation with no physical language adequate for it, and she was out of her tower room and down 3 flights of stairs before she was fully awake. The 3 kings were already in the courtyard. She did not ask how they had known. The mate bond was not something you ignored once it had announced itself, and all 3 of them, she had observed, slept lightly in the particular way of people who have decided that something matters enough to wake for. The courtyard was wrong. The stones, she felt it through her bare feet, were cold in the specific, deeply wrong way the garden had been cold on Thursday, but amplified. What had been a test was now a siege. "It's inside the walls," Dorian said. He was the only one who sounded calm, and it was the calm of someone using every ounce of available will to produce the appearance of it. "It followed the bond test," Elara said. "It mapped the gap, the spaces between us that hadn't been closed yet. That's where it came through." "Then we closed them," Rylan said. His voice had that quality she had catalogued in the war room: decision made, consequence accepted, the words arriving after the commitment, not before. She looked at all 3 of them. The Triad bond, in the texts she and Dorian had been reading for weeks, was described as a convergence, not sequential, not individual, but simultaneous. 3 bonds completing at the same moment, creating not 3 separate connections but a single architecture, a 3-fold structure as old as the pact between the soul line and the land. It required, the oldest text said in its precise and bloodless academic prose, the willing choice of all 4 parties. She had been thinking about this for 3 weeks. She had thought about it with the same methodical honesty she had applied to everything since arriving at this castle, not asking herself if she wanted it, because want was a word she had learned to distrust after 7 years of wanting her way out of a locked garden. She had asked herself instead, is this true? Are these men true? Is what I feel when I stand beside each of them the real thing? Or is it the bond speaking, and is there even a difference? She had reached a conclusion on the 43rd day, which was today. "Yes," she said to Ryland's implication, "we close them." The blight moved in the north garden, a sound like wind with no wind behind it, a darkening at the edge of the firelight the torches were casting across the courtyard walls. Elara turned toward it and felt, for the first time, something other than fear in its presence. Anger, clean and cold and entirely hers. She had been afraid of this thing for 7 years. She had felt it circle her in the dark and eat the edges of the world she was connected to, and she had been afraid, systematically, and with cause. She was not afraid now. She was angry at the blight, at every year of the garden, at every morning she had pressed her palm to cold iron and felt the world she was linked to suffering and been able to do nothing about it. She walked toward it. "Elara," Kaylin's voice sharp. "I know," she said. "Come with me." They came. The mechanics of the Triad bond's completion were not, as the text had implied, a ritual. There was no ceremony, no sacred words, no moment of staged intention. It was, as Elara experienced it, more like something structural, giving way 3 load-bearing walls accepting their own load simultaneously. The architecture they completed settling into place with the deep, resonant solidity of something that had always been meant to be this shape. Kaylin first, his hand in hers, the mate bond that had been humming for weeks becoming a full, rushing sound, like a river you had only previously heard from a distance suddenly surrounding you. The lichen warmth of it, the mountain and pine permanence. Dorian seconded his forehead against hers, the vampire bond quieter in its expression but deeper in its reach, sliding into the spaces between what could be said and what was simply known. Something that would take years to fully map and did not require mapping to be real. Rylan lashed, both hands framing her face, his amber eyes on hers, and the alpha bond arriving not like warmth or depth but like weight, the specific, grounding weight of being seen completely and chosen anyway, of mattering to someone in the irreducible way that asked for nothing in return because it wasn't a transaction, had never been a transaction, had always been a recognition. The blight hit the bond like a wave hitting a cliff. It was not a fair contest. She felt it break, not defeated, not destroyed, not yet, but repelled with a force that sent it screaming, back across the northern garden, back across the walls, back into the dark spaces between the territories where it had grown fat and patient for years on the isolation of a soulbinder in a locked garden. She felt the land respond not immediately, not all at once, but in the way of something deeply damaged beginning the long, necessary work of healing. A pulse, a breath. The rivers that had gone silent not yet flowing, but remembering that they could. She was on her knees in the courtyard. She did not know when that had happened. All three of them were around her, not crowding, not smothering, but present in the specific way she had come to recognize as theirs. Kaelin at her back, a wall, Dorian to her left, a stillness. Rylan before her, both hands still, finally, at rest. "Did it work?" she asked. "The blight retreated," Rylan said. "That's not what I asked." A pause. Then Kaelin's voice behind her, very quiet. "It worked." She exhaled, pressed her palms flat against the courtyard stone. Felt the land her land, the land she was threaded through, the land that had been suffering and afraid alongside her for 7 years feel her back. She sat there for a long time, and let it.
Chapter 6.
The war did not end in a night. This was the thing the old stories never told you about victories. They were beginnings, not endings. The blight had retreated, but it had not dissolved. And the work of pushing it back completely, of healing the rivers and the silent villages, and the 40 miles of lichen forest that had gone dark was the work of months. Slow, iterative, unglamorous. The kind of work that required patience more than heroism, and consistency more than courage. Elara had 7 years of patience. She had more than enough. She worked through the winter in the war room with the kings, on the land itself with her palms pressed to the earth, in the library with Dorian reconstructing the theoretical framework of how a soulbinder's restored bond could be directed as a restorative force rather than merely a defensive one. The blight shrank, not quickly, but measurably. Every 2 weeks, Kaelin updated the map with his thumbnail crescents, and every 2 weeks the crescent line moved a little further from the center. The rivers came back first. The Aldenmere returned on a Tuesday morning in late winter, not silently, not reluctantly, but with the particular enthusiasm of something that had been holding its breath and finally couldn't anymore. The scouts who reported it were not military men. They were farmers, standing at the bank in the early light watching the water run clear and fast and unremarkable, and their report, when it reached the war room, was 3 words: "It is back." Elara read those 3 words and went to the northern garden and wept, quietly and completely, for approximately 20 minutes, and then washed her face and went back to work. The 3 kingdoms unified over the following season, not with conquest, with administration. The merging of 17 packs and 2 kingdoms and 1 dragon territory into a single governing structure was exactly as complex and contentious as everyone expected, and exactly as necessary as everyone knew, and Rylan drove it forward with the relentless, unglamorous competence he brought to everything. And Dorian managed the political architecture of it with a precision that left even seasoned diplomats exhausted and impressed. And Kaelin held the Lycan coalition together through 3 near fractures, with a combination of physical presence and blunt, irrefutable logic that was its own form of eloquence. Elara sat in on most of the council sessions, not as a symbolic figure, as a participant, asking the questions that no one was asking because no one had thought of them, offering the perspective of someone who had spent 7 years being a subject of political decisions she had no power over, and therefore knew exactly where the seams in political structures were most likely to come apart. She was, the council members found with varying degrees of surprise, extraordinarily good at this. "You should have been doing this for years," one of the senior advisors told her, after a session in which she had quietly redirected a 4-hour deadlock with a single question neither side had considered. "Yes," she said simply, "I should have." She said it without bitterness. She had decided, sometime in the long winter of the bond and the blight and the rivers coming back, that bitterness about what had been taken was a way of continuing to let it be taken. She was not going to keep paying for other people's decisions. She knew she was pregnant before any healer confirmed it. She felt it the way she felt everything through the land, through the bond, through the particular attentiveness she had developed over years of having nothing but herself to read. A new thread. 2 new threads, actually small and bright and impossibly distinct from each other, woven into the larger fabric of the bond with the kind of naturalness that suggested they had always been accounted for, that the architecture had made room. She told the three kings on a morning in early spring, in the kitchen, over tea, with the directness that was her native language. The silence that followed had several qualities. "Twins," she said into it. "I think." Rylan made a sound that was not a word. Dorian set his cup down with extraordinary care. Kalen, who had been standing at the window, turned and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something entirely unguarded, entirely undefended, the mountain stillness entirely gone, and underneath it something so simple it was almost startling. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, slightly overwhelmed joy. "Two," he said. "Two," she confirmed. "The Soulbinder texts," Dorian said slowly, recalling, describe twin births during a completed Triad bond as a convergence manifestation. Elara said, "Yes, I read that too." She looked at her tea. "One carries the fire, one carries the spirit of the wolf. Neither is diminished by the other. They are," she paused, finding the word, "complementary. The old texts called them the peace twins, the children a world makes for itself when it's decided to continue." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the spring was happening, the wild gardens releasing their stored winter green in the particular extravagant way of things that have been patient long enough. "Are you all right?" Rylan asked. The question was not about the pregnancy. Or it was about the pregnancy, and also about everything else: the garden, the 7 years, the blight, the winter of work, the choosing she had done, and was still doing. She considered the question with the honesty she had applied to everything. "I am," she said. And then, because it was true and because she had decided that truths should be said, "I think I have been for a while now. I didn't want to say it until I was sure." Rylan looked at her for a moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, not claiming, not pulling, just present. That particular steadiness of his that she had learned to lean into in the way you lean into something that will not move. "You can say it whenever you're sure," he said. The Empire was formally named 3 months later. The 4 territories Lycan, Vampire, Alpha Coalition, Dragon became the Elden-bound Empire, a name drawn from the oldest pre-fracture texts, meaning, roughly, bound by what endures. The naming had been Dorian's suggestion, offered quietly at the end of a long council session with the offhand precision of someone who has been thinking about it for a while, and chosen his moment carefully. No one argued with it. It was simply right. The coronation ceremony was held at the High Castle, because the High Castle was neutral, and because it was the place the Empire had, in the only way that mattered, actually begun in a courtyard at midnight, on bare stone, with a Soulbinder pressing her palms to the earth, and 3 kings choosing to stay. Elara stood at the center of the ceremony in a dress she had chosen herself, dark, as the space between stars, threaded at the hem with the moon petal vine from the High Castle's northern garden, which had finally, after months of careful tending, bloomed. 3 crowns were placed, 3 bonds publicly acknowledged. 1 Soulbinder named, for the first time and in all 4 territories simultaneously, as what she had always been, not property, not prize, not myth. Foundation. She went to the northern garden that evening, alone. Old habit. She did not think she would ever entirely lose it, the need, at the end of significant days, to press her hands to growing things and feel the world feel back. She suspected she would not want to. Some habits, she had decided, were not damage. Some habits were just the shape of who you were. The moon petal vines had reached the top of the north wall and begun their descent down the outside, the same way they had done in Khan's garden 7 years ago. Reaching, always reaching, toward whatever lay beyond. She pressed her palm to the earth. The land answered immediately, full and resonant and warm, the blight's long shadow gone from it entirely now, the rivers running, the forests growing, the silence replaced by the ordinary, magnificent noise of a world that had decided to continue. She felt the twins in it too, bright and distinct, the fire thread and the wolf thread already beginning to weave themselves into the land's fabric the way hers had when she was very young, before anyone knew to be afraid of what she was. She heard footsteps behind her. 3 sets, at different paces, Kalen's even and unhurried, Dorian's quiet as water, Rylan's carrying that particular grounded weight she could identify now without looking. They did not ask if they could join her. She did not tell them to stay. They sat with her in the northern garden while the spring evening settled around the High Castle and the empire that had grown from 1 woman's survival and 3 men's refusal to leave her to it. The moon petal vines silvered in the fading light, The twins moved, she felt it, that small, bright flutter, and she pressed her hand a little harder against the earth. Here, she thought, this is what it counts as. She had her answer. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know. If something in this story moved you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so the next story finds you. Much love, Seer.